Hello and welcome to this PriceBeam webinar. My name is Finn Hansen. I'm one of the co-founders at PriceBeam. And this is a webinar in our series of pricing thought leaders. And with me today, I have Howard Langer. Howard is a global director of strategic revenue management and revenue growth management at Mars. And I'm very excited to have you here with me today, Howard. Welcome. So Howard, you work in strategic revenue management, or I guess what some companies would call revenue growth management. I'm curious, how did you end up in that role? What career path does one take to lead revenue growth management for a company like Mars?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because I think most of us just find ourselves in this discipline of revenue management. It finds us rather than us finding it, which is a bit strange and quite hard to get people into it. But um, I've been in this area for about 20 years or so. I started out actually on the retail side,
Hmm.
working for the largest home improvement retailer in Europe, in price and promotions. I stumbled by accident into this discipline, and it was only just starting up then. Um, but I fell in love with what it is and what it's trying to do. The sheer sort of complexity of trying to solve this problem was fascinating to me, and also being at the heart of several different business functions. So I'm in the CPG side of it now, obviously,
Hmm.
but
Sure.
from it's very similar because it's at the nexus of many different areas. So sales, marketing, operations, legal, finance, they all revenue managers play with all of those folks.
Yeah.
And I just found it fascinating to be at the heart of that and try and solve this conundrum of managing volume. Really is what it boils down to. Cost is important, but
Mm.
it's the managing of the volume and working out the push and the pull, where it comes from, where it goes. How can you maximize the value out of the volume that you have? How can you incentivize the volume that you don't have? Where's the volume coming from? Your competitors, which shoppers? So it's such a
Mm.
multi-dimensional sort of Rubik's cube that I was fascinated by the complexity of it.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really how I stumbled into it.
Do you think sometimes it's difficult or easy because you, as pricing and revenue management is almost sits at the center, as you say. So does that sometimes make it more difficult because it's not sales, it's not marketing, it's not finance, it's
Yeah,
revenue, right?
yeah, I think that's true. And there's an endless sort of debate, or where does it sit as a team? Does it sit in sales? Does it sit in marketing? Of course, in other sort of business lines like travel and tourism and leisure and the hotels and all the rest of it, they'll tend to have a revenue management director sitting right at the top because it's so
Mm,
fundamental to the business and the nature of the business. So yeah, revenue management as a discipline, with a capital D, is um, is a strange one because it's sort of, if you talk to most people in the organization, they would say, yeah, I'm in charge of pricing, I'm in charge of promotion, I'm in charge of the volume, I'm in charge of the margin rate, and then actually they're not really in charge of the engineering of that.
mm, mm,
And I think that's really how I would frame revenue management. It's really sort of engineering
mhm,
um, that the discipline and the process of bringing all of that stuff together, which is why it can get labeled as a sort of a technical and a data sort of function, and it sort of is, but that isn't the primary goal.
mm,
The data and the tools are only there to amplify the talent, and um, and so it unfairly leans, I would say, on the technical side.
mhm, mhm.
It does need that, but it isn't driven by that. That's not where the value originates. Let's put it that
Mhm.
way.
Where do you recruit from? I mean, you obviously have a team behind you, but where do you recruit from to revenue management?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, now I'm with Mars, within the Mars sort of wider family. It's a large organization, and so there
Sure.
are revenue management teams, always looking for their next best move and moving up, moving round, moving, to different locations. Um, when I started out, it was very, very difficult, say 20 years ago. So you ended up really recruiting in largely from finance because
Okay.
of this thing about understanding the data and understanding the
Hmm.
shape of the P&L and these sorts of things. So finance teams sort of get that.
Yeah.
I think now it's slightly different. So there are specialist recruiters out there. It's a bit like category management in CPGs,
Hmm.
this sort of area. So I think the path has been carved out. So there are places to go, but also what I would add to that is different type of skills needed for
Hmm. Hmm.
revenue management teams. So of course there's the more data and the more technical side of it. Then there's the sort of the interpretive analytical side of it. So I've got an output. What does that really mean?
Yeah.
And then you've got the impact and influencing aspect to it, where you have to lead with what you think are the right approaches and work with the senior leadership within whichever organization you're in to really shape that conversation.
Hmm.
And so there's different dimensions and there's different levels within those dimensions. It's not just a revenue manager has to do
Mm.
these things. There's different types.
Yeah. Where do people go after revenue management?
Well, the great thing about this domain is the knowledge you acquire is incredibly valuable. So there are CPGs where being a manager is an essential part of being a general manager or
Hmm.
a country manager or a
Yeah.
regional president. You have to go through that domain because it gives you such a good shape of understanding the P&L,
Mm.
understanding where the demand comes from, all of that. Um, but if you're a revenue manager, I mean, depending on who you are, and again, what your skill set is, you can go down the technical route and become a senior leader on the technical side of things.
Hmm.
Just not revenue management necessarily, but in other,
Mm.
broader technical aspects. But you can easily go into leadership roles. You can go into finance roles. You could go into sales roles. I currently report in through marketing.
Okay.
So,
Hmm.
data-driven marketing and
Yeah.
understanding the shape of the P&L,
Hmm.
depending on the nature of the organization, that's also another route. That's the variety
Hmm.
is
You
an
think
advantage.
do you think that's the I mean, without judging your current organization, but do you think marketing is kind of a natural owner because they own the consumer?
No, it's an outlier compared
Mhm.
to when I look at other organizations and my own experience. So it tends to be within a sales or a finance
Right.
organization.
Hmm.
Um, but Mars is a brand owner,
Hmm.
and so understanding how the brands contribute
Mm.
to the financial success
Sure.
or otherwise
Hmm.
is crucial.
Hmm.
I think it's still an outlier even amongst
Oh, really?
CPGs,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I don't know. I find quite a few who actually do put it within marketing or some sort of maybe a trade marketing organization if there's such a function. But yeah. So when I speak with pricing managers, revenue growth managers, I always tease them a little bit that they had a really easy year last year because of inflation. It was almost like if you need to increase prices, this is now or never, because if all other brands are increasing their prices, then let's go for it as well. That's what inflation means. In at least part of the world, inflation is certainly going down now in 24. Does that change priorities? Does that mean that companies need to work on different things? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So value creation is highly unlikely to come out of pricing in most sectors
Mm.
for yeah a good another 2 or 3 years. Um, I take my hats off to revenue management folks as a team because the 2 years post COVID, I don't think they've ever worked so hard in their lives. And if anybody wanted to see the value of a revenue management team, and I think when that team started getting the phone calls as costs were going up, then it
Mm.
really became obvious about the role that revenue
Mm.
management plays in the organization. Um, so yeah, we see, you know, the revenue management teams are putting a lot of work in order to maintain a healthier shape of margin rates through that process. And now I think it's no secret to say that, you know, volume is a challenge. The economic backdrop globally is difficult. Margin rates have been recouped, and you can see that in all of the public statements from you know, particularly the large CPG players, but also retailers as well. But volume is a challenge as cost of living crisis in many countries is still with us. So pricing is not a viable opportunity. Costs are more stable. They're not flat, but they're more stable. And so retailers and manufacturers and CPGs need to find other sources for growth and also margin health. And I think one of the elements which is often overlooked on the revenue management side is revenue management is active over different time horizons. So there's a 3 to 5 year time horizon for planning out the business. There's the annual plan, the annual customer and trade and promo price planning, and then there's the in-year revenue management of, you know, promotions, running promotions or price changes if you're a retailer. But having a cycle, having that 3 to 5 year thinking allows you many more tunes to play in any one year. You benefit from that if you've done it up front. So what we're seeing, which is no surprise, we're seeing an uptick on the promo side of it. So how can value be communicated to shoppers now immediately, in store or online, and that will be done, you know, through promotions or the introduction of bonus buy packs or something which is easier to get out there. But those brands and those retailers that have managed the assortment over the last couple of years in a way that covers off all of the value bases from, you know, value, mainstream, premium, super premium, all the rest of it, they'll be reaping the benefits of that 3 year, sort of 3 to 5 year time horizon. So innovation, you know, new product development, all of this is a real vitamin boost to, you know, the MAC position, the margin position that folks can have, and allows them more, like I say, more tunes to play. So you've got to look at things over that 3 year horizon.
So do you think the next couple of years are more going to be around, paraphrasing here, but it's more about finding new ways of driving volume through various initiatives rather than, let's say, purely looking at the P&L and, okay, we did the price increase, then let's look at assortment. We did assortment, and now we optimize promotional spend and cut 0.1% here and there in promotional spend. You think it's more volume, how do we grow, than it's how do we cut something in the P&L?
Well, when volumes start to become tense, then everyone looks to costs. So cost is the easiest thing, because if you can remove cost and cut cost out, then it just drops through to the bottom line and everyone's happy. But of course, not everybody's nimble enough to be able to do that, or to have, you know, pockets of you know, cost cutting to create value. So then you got to stimulate demand. So I think we will see increases in, you know, promotional intensity in those markets where it's relevant. Not all markets, not all categories are relevant, but some of them have a high volume on deal and a high history. We'll see the intensity of that. We'll see, I would expect, an uptick in advertising budgets to stimulate demand. So yeah, we will see that, and then, you know, there will be innovation coming through for, you know, whatever folks have planned over the last couple of years, which they will all be hoping will, you know, grow the category as well as grow their own sales. But as we all know, that's an intensive process and a long one to create and design those new products and then manufacture them and get them out onto the shop front. That doesn't happen overnight.
What role do you think that revenue management can play in innovation? I mean, they're not obviously inventing the products necessarily, at least, but
yeah, well, it's a team role, because planning out the shape of a business 3 year hence is, requires all sorts of folks. In a manufacturer, you've got, the supply and marketing side of things are the big drivers. What the revenue management team can do is to map out where they see the opportunities are, the opportunity gaps in the category, working with marketing, working with insights functions to see, well, where's the blue ocean for us as an organization. And then when the innovation and teams are looking at that and thinking about what the product set might look like, then again, revenue management could come in and make estimates on what that might look like. It's 3 years out, so this isn't going to be detailed. This will be sensitivity based. It's a different type of analysis, different type of scenario planning, and then that eventually gets more and more honed. So it's definitely a team sport when it comes to innovation. But if you look at the sort of data that revenue managers have about the relationship between price and volume and cannibalization and switching rates and shopper segments and all of these things, they're all valid and relevant in an innovation conversation.
I saw a discussion the other day, and it was a little bit black and white, but it was a little bit of an argument that in an ideal world, you price first and then you build the product, rather than building the product and then as an afterthought you kind of find a price that you can charge for it.
Yeah, well, I think famously IKEA follow that scenario, and I remember seeing something a few years back about one of the chairs that they were designing. I said, right, the price point is this. Now, what's the chair going to be? What's it going to look like? And to some degree. It depends on the market structure. If you're introducing a product with a highly competitive market, and if it's got innovation, that's great. And the question there is, so what's the premium I can charge for that across which segments that allow me to make the margin that I'm looking for, given the cost base that I have against that product? Sure. So I think the more bespoke type of market and infrequent purchases, IKEA is a relatively infrequent purchase, hard goods. But I think in, FMCG areas, for example, then you've got to really be looking at where's the value to the shopper, and then where does the profit pool live for that value?
Yeah.
Is the shopper going to be happy to pay that price point? And that's where we talk to the shoppers about willingness to pay, obviously. And then we've got to engineer back cost base to make sure that, if you're the manufacturer, that you're happy with the margin that you're making, and the retailer makes the choices on pricing. They need to be happy with their price position on it.
Sure. I'm curious to where you're getting your insights. Is it more of an internal look? Is it more of a shopper look? I'm sure there's many in a company like Mars. There's probably all kinds of sources. But what's important for you in a revenue management setup?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bit like an onion, really. There's some core stuff in the middle of that, and then there are other elements that you want to build in and become more forward thinking on. So, all of the financials that we have, we've got the sell out data, the volumes that we sell out, the price points that we sell out to. We also need to understand what is being sold by the retailers that we work with, the sell-in data that's largely freely available. We obviously all have our costs, and so we understand the financials. So that sort of covers off all of the financials. Then you've got produce data. So when you subject all of this type of information to modeling, then you get your sort of different price elasticities, promo elasticities, switching coefficients and halos and timing lags and all of these things. But increasingly, there are additional data sources which we're bringing in or have brought in or looking to bring in. So, for example, when we are looking at our trade promotion plans, we obviously flag and know what promotions are being run, when and how much and by who and blah, 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 all of this stuff. But the shopper will see that promotion within the context of other media, other advertising, consumer promotions, that ladder up to the final volume. So that needs to be brought into account. Distribution, for folks like Mars is incredibly important because distribution, has a huge change in, if we're available to have those product distribution points in more retailers, that really opens up volume. But things like, social listening and understanding where demand is coming from and more short-term insights as to where demand is moving. That's important. What our competitor set is up to, that's also important. The supply chain is crucial because we need to understand, the stocks and the flows to see if that's going to interrupt volume in the past to allow us to work out what we ought to do in the future. There's probably a load of other things I've missed. I mean, I guess one of the sources which I would say is hugely underused, which I would completely advocate for, is shopper data. And Mars, like other CPGs, are looking to access more first-party data, with the right privacy access. Retailers have the benefit of being the end sales office. So if they've got loyalty cards or other mechanisms, these are fantastic sources of segmenting shopper bases into where is your value. Where does your value come from? Because I'm not saying that 80% of the value comes from 20% of the shoppers. That's not always, but there is a trade-off here. So each manufacturer and retailer has a fixed investment pot, and so they want to maximize the return on that investment. So really, there's a question about, well, which shopper group should we be spending on and over-indexing on to have a higher return? And the folks, there are many retailers with loyalty cards who have spent, years doing that. And I think the CPGs, there's an opportunity to speak the same language as the retailer by using that data. Getting hold of it is obviously the challenge. That's either through partnerships. It can be expensive, but maybe tier 3 retailers are less expensive and want to play. So there's panel data, obviously. So there are emerging data sets, but understanding how the shopper is responding in different types of shopper groups is fundamental. I mean, you can see on my wallpaper here, we talk about pet parents, because the pet side of Mars, if that wasn't obvious to folks, the pet side of Mars is actually huge. Folks understand the snacking side of Mars through Mars Wrigley, either through the chocolate side of the business or the gum side of the business, but the pet business is enormous, Mars. And it's also a great place to be because every time you see a presentation, it's got a puppy or a kitten on it. So it always puts a smile on your face, even if you're looking into some challenging financials or work that hasn't been done. But we are fixated on what we call the pet parent here, which is our end shopper, our end consumer. So what do our pet parents want, for their pets? And again, there are different buying behaviors across different groups of pet parents. And if you don't know that, then, you're missing out. There's an opportunity to, there's more money on the table there.
Great. Maybe a last question from me before we just see if there's any questions from the audience, but where do you see something like artificial intelligence not supporting revenue growth management? Obviously, everybody's talking about it, right? But
everybody's talking about it, and I've been in this business long enough to see the waves and the jargon and the noise and all the rest of it. And when folks say artificial intelligence, do they mean modeling? Do they mean regression models and these sorts of things? Well, they will do if there's money in it. So there's of course, the more granular we can get, the better the insights. Revenue management is done at a granular level.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. You have to be down there in the depths to understand what's really going on. So models, whichever models they are going to help you move out of the Excel realm into something that can make transparent relationships that Excel can't. So the promise of AI, machine learning and AI is that we can consume vast amounts of data and uncover more and more relationships that were previously hidden on a more timely basis, which I completely subscribe to. So there's more accuracy of the model outcomes and the parameters that we're trying to surface through all of these techniques. There's a promise, I'll call it that. There's a promise of being able to model right across an organization and bring in marketing data, supply data, as well as demand data and the financial data, and be able to bring all of that together in a huge data cube. And then revenue management would certainly have a role to play there. Early days, but that is exciting, I would say. And the other thing is, one thing which is a real itch that I have to scratch is, revenue managers, like most folks in the organization, have to hunt and peck around on systems for graphs and tables and goodness only knows what. Well, surely there are better ways to interface and use technology and AI to help those who want to know the answer to access that data in an easier way rather than tapping away on a keyboard. So I think that's another opportunity for us. And actually, my final point is not actually about the AI, but it's on the previous question, and I just want to go back to that about data sources, because another itch that I have to scratch, which I think is incredibly important, is the sustainability side and the role that revenue management has with respect to sustainability. So, like most other organizations, there's carbon that's going in due to the work that we're doing, into the atmosphere, this packaging that we use. And we're doing a huge amount of work and investing a lot to reduce all of that. And where is that in our revenue management thinking? Where is it in our tools? Where is it in our KPIs? Because it will be increasingly in the KPIs of our organizations. And if we're trying to manage the volume, sometimes that volume is more carbon intensive and sometimes it's less. And pricing and promotion and mix management are incredibly important sources of volume and an organization's plan for financial impact. But we should also be looking at the planetary impact alongside that. And for example, that might change a promotional plan that you run because it's more carbon intensive. Then it might have a slightly better financial impact, but you could save a whole heap of carbon. Now, I'm aware that these are difficult decisions, because trading off profit for the planet is something which our leadership teams really need to get to grips with. But having that data in these tools gives it the visibility for us to have surface those tensions and have the conversation. And I would really encourage anybody in this space who gets access to this discussion, where's sustainability? Ask the question, what data can you get? It doesn't have to be perfect. Put it into your tool sets. You might find something you really are amazed by. And let's have the planetary impact as well as the financial impact always assessed alongside each other.
It's an interesting point, because when we sometimes do consumer research and go out, if you ask consumers, if you ask the market, then obviously it's the answer is invariably, at least in Western Europe and North America, it's invariably going to be a positive answer about the environment and sustainability. But once you start doing testing where it's more around simply giving the consumer a choice and highlighting that the sustainable product might be more expensive. I don't know if it's because of just the times we've been in the last 1 or 2 years with pressure on people's financials, but it seems there has been a bit of reluctancy to pay for it once they have to actually do something rather than just say something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, um, sustainability credentials can add value
Hmm.
again for certain shopper groups.
Mm.
I think there's an understanding of the impact that we're having and a general uncomfortableness about where we're headed. Not by everybody, I
Mm.
understand this, but by the majority.
Hmm.
But does that mean the mainstream shopper wants to pay for that? Well, that's
Mm.
unlikely
Hmm.
as a carte blanche statement. But there will be segments
Yeah.
where that is important,
Hmm.
and we know this from if you look at the online sales, and if you look at the online players, and you look at the sustainability moves that pretty much everybody's doing it, folks don't want to do that. Retailers, manufacturers don't want to do it unless there's a good reason. Either it's their part of their purpose,
Hmm.
and or it's part of their financial plan. So um, it's not an easy one to solve,
Mm.
for sure. And I certainly don't have the answer. But my encouragement would be to get the data on the table
Hmm.
and to have this conversation anytime you're looking at a pricing plan, a promo plan. And the more and more we talk about it, the more other folks will say, yeah, we need to have this
Mm.
on our radar, on our dashboards, looking at the financial impact and the
Hmm.
planetary impact
Mm.
together. And then we can choose to make the decisions that we need to choose.
Hmm.
So, it's another important data source that will help us make better quality decisions.
Hmm. Sure. Great. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm just looking at the chat panel if there are any questions from any of the audience. Um, Otherwise, I might have just one more question on my own. So it's a bit of a obviously of a difficult one, but if people want to have a career in revenue growth, what should they do? What should they learn?
Um,
Young people joining the workplace. What's
yeah, well, I think the challenge that we have is you can't get a degree in this stuff.
Hmm.
And there's probably about 2 or 3 books, sort of dedicated to it. Um, so it depends. The organization that you join might be really hot on this, and then may well be a career track. Um, if not, folks, like I say, it will tend to find it coming out of finance or coming out of sales. I think my advice is you're not alone.
Mm.
We are out there. There are organisations. In fact, I started up an organisation some years ago to get folks together in the UK, revenue management managers together in the UK, just to share
Hmm.
the practice in the domain. And my good friends at Revenue Management and Pricing International were really helped me get that together, and they do function. Um, and I would say you have to follow what's interesting to you. It may not be called revenue management; it might be called something else.
Mm.
But if you get into it, and if these are the sort of questions that interest you, know that there is a career for you. All of the big players have grown their functions, particularly post COVID.
Mm.
So it's healthier than it's ever been. I
Hmm.
think the terminology revenue management, revenue growth management, or profitable growth management, there's so
Yeah.
many of these now. It just shows you that that springs up from the number and the variety of different organizations that have invested in
Hmm.
these teams. It's
Mm.
incredibly sought after work. I mean, getting hold of um, revenue managers with experience
Hmm.
is very difficult,
Mm.
and the law of demand and supply tells you that means it's relatively well reimbursed because
Hmm.
it's a scarce quantity.
Sure.
So that also might incentivize folks who are thinking about getting into it. But it's incredibly rewarding. I mean, I would say that I've spent a lot of time in it, so I'm a little bit biased. But for all those reasons I've said before, it's something which is never solved,
Hmm.
complicated, um, but highly rewarding. and it puts you at the heart of all of the key decisions that get made in the organization that you're in.
Sure. Fantastic. I think that's a good final statement there. So with that, we will be closing the webinar. If you do have any questions to Howard or to myself, I'm sure we can facilitate that if you contact us through the various price beam channels. But thank you so much, Howard, for joining me today. It's been very delightful and great insights for me. So thank you for your time, and to all our audiences, thank you as well, and see you soon.
Great. Thanks, man. Thanks, everyone.